Hello! In this video, I want to show you the process of drafting a pattern and making a prototype of some leather boots. I have these awesome Doc Marten boots and I wanted to recreate them in miniature for my dolls. I started by testing an idea I had to roughly mould wet leather over the Fimo leg shapes I had previously made to see how well they keep the shape once dry. Then I trimmed the excess off to get a front boot shape. They came out great. The moulds I used are Fimo leg shapes I made to match the different Blythe leg types that I have. My next thought was about what kind of eyelets I can make. The smallest real ones I have are way too big. I thought I could fake some by using silver pen or paint around a punched hole. I think the silver gel pen worked just fine. I made a Fimo shape to clip the wet leather to when I make more boot fronts in future. These clips are Clover Wonder Clips. They're very useful for leather when pins are really no use. Still thinking about the eyelets, I made some teeny Fimo rings. They could maybe be glued to the leather, but I realised they were basically like seed beads. Tiny glass beads, so I looked for some of those in my stash. They fit perfectly inside a 2mm punched hole. In the absence of tiny real eyelets, they look really cute and realistic. I have a bunch of leather samples from a sofa shop. If you have some to choose between, thinner will be better for using in miniatures. I just got this knife for thinning leather. I need to practice with it some more, but it works well. I tried out the seed beads on the thinnest leather too. First, I start by searching Google Images for boot pattern pieces to get an idea of the kind of shapes I'll need to develop my own pattern. I start by sketching out the shapes and rough details of the pattern pieces I'll need. The leather test piece I made fits perfectly, so I just draw around it onto graph paper. I measure the back of the leg and transfer it to the paper. Then measure the distance from the ankle to the bottom of the heel. I curve this line in. I measure the calf and transfer half the measurement. I curve up towards the front to match the Doc Marten's style. I measure the ankle and half it. I then try to work out how far forward from the centre back the piece will need to come. I estimate the angle and curve of this part and compare to the doll's leg once cut out. I sketch and cut out a tongue piece, and I draw round the foot with some extra space and try to cut out a symmetrical foot shape. Next, I sketch out a back heel strip to join both the side pieces. I plan to fold the top as I sew it in to make a loop at the top. I check the paper pieces against each other. Now I move on to cutting out the leather. I use a white gel pen on the leather side. It dries fine and can be rubbed off with a damp fingertip once it's cut out. I cut these out with a couple of millimetre left around. I realised the Fimo shape I made earlier is too thick, so I cut out a wooden blind slat to size to use the clips on instead. I realised the leather will stretch when wet, and I trim off the few millimetres I'd left on earlier. This should work. I run the leather piece under the tap for a few moments and pat off any excess water with a towel. I use my fingers to push the leather into shape and pinch the leather to the wood using the Wonder Clips. I set it aside to dry out completely. I cut out the other pieces I'll need, cutting on the white line with no extra. I repeat the soaking, stretching and clipping for the other toe front. The clips left little dimples in the leather, but it should be okay. While waiting, I had sewn together the back seam using a backstitch and a leather sewing needle with yellow thread. I joined one side piece to the back strip from the heel, moving up. I folded over the top as I went, then sewed from the top down to the heel for the second side piece. It looked fine, but I wasn't sure the angle was right, so I copied the template and decreased the angle of the heel from the back for the next version of the pattern. Next, I need to cut out the tongue and sew it onto the front piece. Using the clips while I test the positioning, I sew the side to the front along the curved edge with 2 rows of tiny backstitch. I also sew in a decorative heel shape. I then sew on the other side to the front, as before. I put in my Blythe leg and draw around the sole onto the leather, knowing there will be excess to be trimmed. I sew it on and trim the excess. I use the leather hole punch to make eyelet holes, and I test lace the boot with some thin ribbon. It looks cute. I'm done with my first prototype, so I make some more changes to my pattern. A shorter boot height, changing the heel angle, and widening the tongue. I cut these out of leather, punch the eye holes and sew some decorative stitches before I begin assembly. I join the side and back pieces just as before, and sew the tongue to the front too. I Mod Podge some thin cotton to the inside of the tongue and upper boot, recreating the original Doc Martens. I sew on the sole with just a running stitch. Then cut another sole piece in a contrasting colour. I glue it on and cover the edges in Mod Podge. I decided to try gluing the seed beads into the holes. It looks great, but I'm not sure if they'll stay. I then cut out another sole piece. I cut off the heel and double the thickness by gluing it onto another scrap of leather. I brush glue around the edges again. I cut a piece of embroidery thread 35 centimeters long. I split it into 3 strands each. I dipped the ends in glue and dried them to keep them together. I used a needle to carefully thread the laces, and as I feared, one of the beads fell out. I glued it back in and finished lacing. So here's the second prototype. I'm so happy with the fit and the look of it so far, but it could be even better. I have now ordered some tiny 1.5mm eyelets, which I didn't know existed until now, and I'm waiting for them to come before I make a finished pair of Doc Martens. I will use the leather that I thinned for those too. I'm pleased to say it fits the curvy Barbie dolls perfectly too. I have scanned and labelled all the pattern pieces and made an A4 printable page free for you to save and print yourself. Follow the link in the description. Keep an eye on the channel for a future boots video once my supplies come, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!